Until 3 months ago, I believed my family was just complicated. I didn't know we were built on a lie. It didn't start with a slow discovery. It started with a slap in the face in front of 200 people. The grand ballroom was shimmering. My parents, Charles and Evelyn, were celebrating their 25th anniversary, and my father had spared no expense. I stood there, 28 years old, a structural engineer who had worked loyally in the family business since I was a teenager, feeling a familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. My older brother Mark was already holding court, his laugh a little too loud. He was the golden child. I was the reliable one, the placeholder. My father tapped his microphone. "To my two sons," he boomed, his voice full of pride. My eyes met my mother, and she gave me a tight, nervous smile. I thought for a fleeting second that this might be the moment I was finally seen. He called Mark up first. "My firstborn, your passion and spirit are the future of this family." And then he handed him the keys, not just any keys, the keys to the 1974 Ford Bronco, the project car we had all worked on for a decade, the one I'd spent countless weekends in the garage restoring while Mark was off on his latest soul-searching trip. The crowd erupted in applause. Mark beamed, holding the keys aloft like a trophy. Then my father looked at me, "And Peter, my steady, reliable Peter, you're the rock." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a long, velvet box. I walked to the podium, my heart thudding. I opened it. Inside was a heavy, silver Montblanc pen. A pen! The silence was awkward, punctured only by a few scattered, confused claps. I looked from my father's expectant face to my mother's pained one, to Mark's smug grin. This was it. The culmination of a lifetime of being the afterthought, the universe's most expensive participation trophy. I felt something in me snap, not into anger but into a cold, crystal-clear calm. I picked up the pen, clicked it, and placed it back in the box with a soft, final thud on the podium. "A pen," I said, my voice steady and clear in the microphone. "How fitting, for all the times you've asked me to sign away my interests in this family." I turned and walked out. I didn't run. I didn't look back. The silence behind me was louder than any applause could ever be. That was the moment I decided to stop being the rock they built their lies on. I was going to be the earthquake. The pen was the catalyst, but the truth had been waiting for years. A week after the party, the tension at home was a thick fog. My mother asked me to come over to help her find her passport in my father's old roll-top desk, a massive oak thing I'd always loved. As I slid my hand into a deep cubby, my finger caught a tiny, almost invisible seam along the back panel. I pushed. With a quiet click, a small, hidden drawer slid open. Inside was a single, yellowed envelope. It was addressed to me. My blood ran cold. The handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar. The return address had a name I didn't know: Arthur Shaw. The letter inside was short, written in the same tremulous script. "Peter, if you're reading this, your mother has finally grown a conscience, or you've been clever. I knew your father as a brother, and he destroyed me for money. He didn't just betray me, he built his entire empire on a lie that affects you most of all. He stole my company, my legacy, and the woman I loved. The proof is in the original project files for the Northwood development. Find them. Don't trust the stories you've been told." "Arthur." I sat on the floor, the paper trembling in my hands. "A lie that affects you most of all." What did that mean? Was I not my father's son? The thought was so monstrous I shoved it away. This was about business, it had to be. I became a ghost in my own life. I told my parents I was swamped with work, and I was just not the work they thought. I started digging. The Northwood development was the project that launched my father's company, Coulter Construction, into the big leagues. The official story was that his partner, Arthur, had a nervous breakdown and voluntarily sold his share for a pittance before the project took off. I spent nights in the city archives pulling old building permits. I used my company access to dig into archived financial servers my father probably forgot existed. I found the original partnership agreement, and then I found the termination contract. The signatures were there, but they didn't match the ones on the partnership papers. Arthur's signature was a crude forgery. I cross-referenced the dates with bank transfers. A week after the forged sale, a wire of $250,000, Arthur's supposed buyout, was sent to an offshore account I couldn't trace. But that same day, a separate, identical amount was deposited into the newly formed Coulter Construction account. The seed money. The stolen seed money. I didn't plan a dramatic showdown. I planned an audit. I invited my parents to my apartment under the guise of a truce. When they arrived, the air was thick with unspoken words from the anniversary party. I didn't say a thing. I simply handed my father a folder. He opened it, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion and then to a sickly, ashen gray. My mother peered over his shoulder and her hand flew to her mouth. Where did you get this? My father whispered, his voice ragged. Arthur Shaw sent me a letter, I said, my voice flat. He told me to look for the Northwood files. The color drained from my mother's face completely. Arthur, he contacted you. What is the lie that affects me most of all? I asked, looking directly at her. My father tried to bluster. This is stolen conjecture. Arthur was unstable. He was your best friend, I interrupted, still calm. And you forged his signature, you stole his company, his money, you built everything we have on a theft. The room was silent, then my mother started to cry soft, hopeless sobs. It wasn't just the company, Peter, she choked out. My father shot her a venomous look. Evelyn, don't. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a decades-old grief. Arthur wasn't just his partner. Before I married your father, Arthur and I were in love, we were engaged. The world tilted. What? Your father was jealous, she continued, the words tumbling out now. He orchestrated the whole thing. He cut Arthur out financially and personally. He convinced me Arthur had been unfaithful. I only found out the truth years later, but by then I was pregnant with you. I stared at them, the pieces clicking into a horrifying new picture. The favoritism for Mark, who was the spitting image of my father, the constant, subtle dismissal of me, the way I never quite fit. So, I said, the coldness in my voice surprising even me. The lie that affects me most of all is that this entire family, my entire life, has been a constant reminder to both of you of the man you destroyed. I'm not your son, am I? I'm Arthur's. The silence that followed was the most profound sound I have ever heard. My father looked away, my mother just wept. It was all the confirmation I needed. The revelation didn't break me, it forged me. I was no longer Charles Coulter's disappointed son. I was Arthur Shaw's son, and I had a legacy to reclaim. But I wouldn't do it with a sledgehammer, I would do it with the precision I used to design buildings. I spent the next month becoming a shadow partner in my own family's company. I used my engineering knowledge to identify every structural weakness in our business, the loans tied to personal guarantees, the projects operating on razor-thin margins, the zoning approvals my father had greased. I compiled it all. I wasn't going to destroy the company, I was going to take it from him. I called a meeting in my father's office, just the two of us. Mark wasn't invited. I placed a new folder on his desk. This is a choice, I said. Option A, you voluntarily step down as CEO and appoint me as your successor with 51% controlling interest. You and Mark remain on the board but with minority votes. Furthermore, you will liquidate your vintage car collection and your offshore accounts to establish an irrevocable trust fund for Arthur Shaw, valued at the $250,000 you stole from him, plus 40 years of compounded interest. It comes to just over $4.2 million. His face was purple with rage. And option B, he snarled. Option B, I said calmly, is that I take this folder to the district attorney, the IRS, and the Wall Street Journal. It contains evidence of fraud, forgery, and tax evasion. You will lose the company, your fortune, and very likely your freedom. The choice is yours. He was trapped, the great Charles Coulter, outmaneuvered by the son he never saw as a threat, the son he'd only ever given a pen. He signed. The board meeting where the transition was announced was the most satisfying moment of my life. My father sat slumped in his chair, a broken man. Mark was apoplectic, screaming about betrayal until security escorted him out. I didn't gloat. I simply laid out my vision for the company's future, ethical, sustainable, and prosperous. The first thing I did as the new head of Coulter Construction was to find Arthur Shaw. He was living in a modest apartment, a quiet man whose spirit had been broken long ago. I introduced myself not as Peter Coulter but as Peter Shaw. I showed him the trust fund documents. The look on his face wasn't about the money, it was about the vindication, the acknowledgement. We've started having coffee every week. He's teaching me about woodworking. My father and Mark are still in the family, but they have no power. They are ghosts in the empire they built on sand. The public story is that Charles is retiring to enjoy his wealth, but everyone knows the truth. Dignity was my weapon and success was my revenge. I built a new foundation for myself, one based on truth, and for the first time in my life the structure feels sound.